It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Bruce Schneier today, so I'm going to get out of the way. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for coming. I know those of you staying the weekend could be waiting on a 5-hour line for your badge now, and I appreciate you being here instead. So I'm going to talk about incident response. I'm going to talk about it kind of in a meandering fashion. I'm going to talk about 3 trends in cybersecurity. I'm going to talk about 5 pieces of science, 4 from economics, 1 from psychology. Talk a bit about the current state of incident response and try to tie this all together with some systems theory from the U.S. Air Force. That's the plan for the next hour. And again, if you're coming in, there are actually lots of seats all around. Probably in every row there exists 1 seat. So if you just come down an aisle, look left or right, you'll find a seat and sit down. And the fire codes say you can sit in any empty seat. You can't sit on someone else's lap unless you really like them. All right, so trends first. First trend is that we're losing control of our IT infrastructure. And I think this is really interesting to watch because it's really a function of the way technology is working right now. Right, the first thing that's happening is that the rise of cloud computing means we have a lot less control of our data. Right, our email, our photos, calendar, address book, messages, documents, right, they're all on servers belonging to Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, right, these different companies. Probably in this room is going to be the greatest concentration of people who actually still have their stuff on their computers. Right, go out of this room, out of this conference, everybody else is going to have their data on someone else's cloud. Right, that's the way the world's working. It's true for individuals. It's also becoming true for organizations. Right, organizations now are outsourcing communications, CRM systems, applications, desktops, right, entire IT infrastructures into the cloud. And as we do that, we lose control over the tech details of those things. Right? We often can't affect the security of those systems. I mean, we can depending on virtualization, but the core security we simply have to trust. A lot of times we have actually no visibility into the security. I mean, I can't tell you what kind of operating system Facebook uses. I have no idea. And I pretty much don't care. Right? Also, we're increasingly accessing all this data through devices where we have much less control. Right? We're using these things. Right? iPhones, iPad, Android phones, Chromebooks. Right? Devices where we don't have as detailed a control of the configuration as we do on our computers. Right? I cannot run arbitrary software on this machine unless I break it, which normal people aren't going to do. And if you look at the operating systems, you look at Windows 8, you look at Apple's Mountain Lion, now Yosemite, right? Both of those are moving in this same direction, right? Of more vendor control, less user control. And again, corporations are using these things just as much as individuals are because people want them, people like them. So it gets, again, less control of the infrastructure. Now, organizations are doing this for pretty much for solid financial reasons. Right? It makes a lot of sense to outsource all this. It's cheaper, it's better, more reliable, all the reasons you do it. And in general, we in society always outsource infrastructure. I mean, IT is sort of catching up here. But as security people, this means we have much less control. So that's the first trend. Second trend, attacks are getting more sophisticated. Now, there's a lot of lousy news out there. What's reported on seems to be a function of, what editors find interesting and less what's real. But we are seeing an increase in attacker sophistication. Right? There's this variety of attackers, nation state, non-nation state, hobbyists, criminals. And we are seeing increasing sophistication across all levels. I mean, I have debates on cyber war. And people are talking about some of these major attacks as examples of cyber war. And I think that's nonsense. I think what's really going on, and the really important trend, is that we're increasingly seeing warlike tactics being used in more broader cyber conflicts. Right? This is important. Technology spreads capability, especially computing technology, which can automate attacks and capabilities. And it used to be you could tell the attacker from the weaponry. And if you walked outside on the street and you saw a tank, you knew that the US Army was involved because only armies could afford tanks. Right? The weaponry told you who the attacker was. That shortcut doesn't work anymore. Right? Everyone's using the same tactics, everyone's using the same technologies. They're all across the threat spectrum. So a lot of this is advanced persistent threat, a buzzword that I started out hating and have come around to like, because I think it describes something really important about IT security that as an industry we've largely missed. So you can think of attackers along two different axes, skill and focus. So a low skill, low focus attacker, that's a script kiddie, right? That's an opportunist. That's someone who's attacking everything and anything. Right? What I think of as the background radiation of the internet. Right? High skill, low focus, think of those as identity theft attacks, zero-day exploits, right? The kind of stuff we also see pretty regularly. Low skill, high focus is your typical targeted attack. High skill, high focus, that's APT. That's advanced persistent threat. And the difference, the reason this is an important distinction, is that the defensive posture, the way you look at your defense is different. Right? In a normal criminal attack, what matters is relative security. Right? If your security is better than the people around you, you are safe. The typical criminal wants a database of credit card numbers. Doesn't matter where he gets them. It'll be you or somebody else. If you're better, you're fine. Against an APT, the attacker for some reason wants you. And there it doesn't matter how much better you are than your neighbors. What matters is, are you better than the attackers? And we all know in this room that if the attacker is sufficiently motivated, skilled, and funded, they will get in. Right? You all know somebody who does pen testing for a living, and you know they never fail not to get in. Right? The question is how we deal with it. I think this is politically motivated attacks. And I define politics very broadly here. Right? Nationalistic, religious, ethical, against institutions, against governments. So you think of, companies in politically charged industries, big oil, big tobacco, big pharma. You think of, companies everyone loves to hate. Used to be Microsoft, now it's Google. And these are the targets for these politically motivated attackers. Financially motivated hacking has also gotten more sophisticated. Right? Bigger, better funded, more international. I think what's really happened is that cybercrime has finally matured as an industry. Right? There's now an entire supply chain in place for cybercrime. Thieves, fences, mules, all the pieces are there. Anything that you can't do, you can outsource. You can chain it all together. And the process from theft to monetization has become very fast and very efficient. So that's trend 2. Trend 3 is the increased government involvement in cyberspace. Right? Long gone are the days when governments didn't understand the internet and when they left the internet alone. The regulatory environment is getting much more sophisticated. This is domestically and internationally. There's a lot more rules involving personal data, especially outside the US. On the attack side, there's a lot of nation-state sponsored espionage and attack. We're seeing, we saw an indictment a few months ago of some attackers from China against US corporate targets. We're seeing nation-state attacks conducted by the US, by other countries. And a lot of time, organizations are really collateral damage, that we're sort of in the way more than anything else. There's a lot more talk about critical infrastructure, which is going to mean more government-run defense. As countries realize that their power grid, that their transportation infrastructure, are all dependent on the internet, they're going to start saying, hey, we need to be in charge of its defense. They're going to see that more and more. Right? Also, we have a cyber war arms race going on. There's something like 27 countries now with cyber commands. They are all building cyber weapons. They're all stockpiling vulnerabilities, and they're all looking at each other with suspicion, and then doubling their efforts to make sure they are stronger than before. And I think this is increasingly destabilizing. All right, so those are the trends. Now I want to give you some IT economics that's relevant to security. So I have 4 pieces of economics that matters for IT and matter for security. And I think the more we understand them, the more we understand the weird stuff that happens in our industry. The first one is network effect. You've all heard of Moore's law. There's a lesser known law called Metcalfe's law, which says that the value of a network equals the square of the number of users. Basically, the value of the network equals the pairwise connections between the nodes. This is true for real networks, phones, email, SMS, Skype, Facebook users. Right? And it's pretty, the intuition is pretty simple. Right? 1 fax machine is useless, 2 are boring, you have 1 million, suddenly you have a network. Right? Same for email, for everything else. The more people that have the system, the more valuable the system is. Right? The more people on Instagram, the more you want to be on Instagram. This is also true for virtual networks. Right? The network of Windows versus Mac users or iOS versus Android users. The more people in the virtual network, the more apps, the more user groups, the more stuff happens. So what this means, right, this phenomenon means you tend to have a single dominant player in the marketplace. Because the big get bigger, because being big is valuable to the new users. Right? Think of Facebook, think of Skype, think of Windows. And most people are on Windows because most people know are on Windows. And people who are on Mac is because people they know are on Mac. Second piece of economics that's relevant is the notion of fixed costs versus marginal costs. So when you look at any product, there's 2 types of costs. There's the development cost to develop the thing and the cost to make each individual thing. And in IT, most cost is in development. Right? So for this wonderful hat of mine, there's some design cost, then there's a cost for making another one. But for this thing, whatever it is, it's a random disk up here, right? The cost of the first one might be a bunch of $1 million, and the cost of the second one is free. 10 cents. It's a DVD. So this weird economics, that all the cost of the thing is front-loaded in the development, means stealing the result of the development becomes a very powerful attack. Right? Think of movies, think of music, think of pharmaceuticals. Right? Being able to make a lot of these and have someone else pay to make the first one can be very valuable. And this is why you see a lot of security going into making this not happen. Right? Fundamentally, mechanisms that break the market, because we have to artificially make it harder to make a lot of these, so whoever made the first can recover his money. Now, in other cases, the high fixed costs become a barrier to competition. Right? Think of Google Maps. Or actually, Google Street View is a better example. Right? Once someone drives a car around the entire planet taking pictures, it's much harder for a competitor to do the same thing. And then you have these dynamics where vendors will cut costs of sale dramatically to drive out competition. Right? So if the maker of this thing sees a competitor on the line, they can drop their costs to almost nothing, where the competitor can't compete because he hasn't recovered his fixed costs yet. Third piece of IT economics that matters a lot are the notion of switching costs. So a switching cost is the cost to switch to a competitor's product. Now, in some cases, switching costs are very low. Right? If you drank a Coke today and you didn't like it, you can drink a Pepsi tomorrow. The switching cost is zero. That means the Coke has to taste good or you're going to switch. Sometimes switching costs are high. Right? If AT&T pisses me off today, I'm likely going to keep them tomorrow. Because getting a different phone carrier is expensive, it's time-consuming, it's annoying. Right? Because, and in IT, right, switching from one product to another can be a lot of things, right? It can mean retraining staff, rewriting applications, converting data. What's relevant to us is that the higher the switching costs, the more a company can piss you off before you'll switch. Right? In industries where switching costs are high, customer service is lousy. Because you have this, what's called lock-in. Right? Customers are locked in. And this is why you have, in our industry, companies doing everything they can to keeping switching costs high. Right? That includes proprietary file formats, that includes non-compatible accessories, not letting you take your data with you when you leave. Right? Apple wants it really hard for you to take your music with you when you leave iTunes. Right? All game companies want it to be very expensive or impossible for you to run one set of games on someone else's console. Now, a good decade and a half ago, the cell phone companies fought really bitterly cell phone number portability. Because the whole cost of you reprinting your business cards, telling people your no phone number, right, kept the switching costs high. All these three things tend to lead to a dominant market structure. Right? Big get bigger, and big stay big. Right? It's not guaranteed, but these are trends in that direction. A fourth piece of IT economics, this is especially relevant to security, is the notion of a lemons market. So this is work by an economist named George Akerlof. He actually won a Nobel Prize for this. And what he studied was markets where there was an asymmetric information between the buyer and the seller. Specifically markets where the seller knew a lot more about the product than the buyer. The specific example he used was a used car market. And this is his thought analysis. Suppose there is a town with 100 used cars for sale. 50 of them cost $2,000, and 50 of them are lemons that cost $1,000. In that market, the median price for a car is $1,500. Trust me on the math. And in that market, all the lemons sell and none of the good cars sell. And so what he proposed is that in a market where the buyer can't tell the difference between a good car and a lemon, lemons drive the good cars out of the market. Right? When the buyer can't tell the difference between a good product and a mediocre product, the mediocre products win. And since he came up with this theory, it's been verified experimentally, it's been verified observationally. This is true. Right? This is what happens. This is a lemons market. And I think this explains quite a lot about IT security. I mean, if you think about the antivirus companies of the 1980s, the firewalls of the 90s, the IDSs of the 2000s, the companies that won weren't the best products because the buyers couldn't tell the difference. Right? I can hold up two encryption products. They use the same algorithms, the same protocols. Right? They make the same security claims. One is really good, one is kind of mediocre. You can't tell the difference. What are you going to buy? You're going to buy the cheaper one. Right? The real problem here is that the requirements are non-functional. Right? It's actually easy to tell if, a word processor does italics. You hit the italics button and see what happens. Right? That is a functional requirement, easy to test. Whether an encryption product is secure is much, much harder to test. So security, availability, reliability, what I think of as the why requirements. Buyers have trouble telling the difference. And this is why you see a lot of effort going into what economists call signals. And signals are ways that sellers signal to buyers that their products are actually not lemons. Right? In the used car market, they tend to be warranties. Take the car home, drive it for a month, if you don't like it, bring it back, and give you your money back. In IT, signals tend to be certifications, right? Tend to be awards, references. I mean, all the ways that our bosses buy IT products, not by knowing what they're doing, but by finding someone else that they can rely on. Right? Remember in the 1960s, right? No one ever got fired for buying IBM. That's what that meant. I don't know what to buy, but they all buy IBM. I must buy IBM. Or today, best practices. I don't know what to do, but everyone says do this, so I'm going to do this. I mean, that's a lemons market. All right, that's the economics. Now my one piece of psychology. I am going to try to explain security in terms of one psychological theory. And the theory is prospect theory. You'll also hear this called loss aversion or framing effects. Basically, it is a way that we as humans look at risk. The quintessential experiment in prospect theory is to take a room full of subjects. In the beginning it's usually college undergrads, because that's who you got. You divide the room in half, and you ask one side of the room to make a choice, and the choice is between $1,000, here's the cash, or a coin flip at $2,000. Kind of an appropriate experiment for Las Vegas. And if you survey a room full of people, you will find that about 3/4 will take the sure thing. Right? That despite everything Las Vegas says, more people would rather have $1,000 than a coin flip chance at $2,000. Second half of the experiment is take the other half of the room, and you give them a very similar but importantly different choice. I can either take $1,000 from you right now, right? Take it out of your bank account, or I will let you have a coin flip chance at me taking $2,000 or nothing. And it turns out, if you ask a room full of people to make that choice, about 3/4 of them will take the chance. Now, this is actually really interesting. The people who came up with this theory also won a Nobel Prize in economics, even though they were psychologists, freaking out everybody, because economists said this is impossible, yet this has been proven again and again. And it's a very robust result across ages, across cultures, done with little money, with real money. I mean, this experiment has been done a lot. But basically, as a species, we are risk averse when it comes to gains and risk seeking when it comes to losses. And it's not just us. Someone figured out how to do this experiment with other primates, and we kind of all are. There's been a bunch of explanations of this. I think the best one comes from evolutionary psychology. And this is the basic story. If you imagine yourself as an individual living at the edge of survival, even a small win means you'll live to see tomorrow. So for this half of the room, if they take coin flips at $2,000 or nothing, half of them will get nothing, half of them will die. But if they take a sure thing of $1,000, they'll all live. But this half of the room, also living at the edge of survival, a sure loss of $1,000 means you're all dead. But a coin flip loss of $2,000 means half of you lose nothing, half of you survive. Right? So our brains are primed to have this bias. And I mean, the real interesting part of this experiment is you could actually take the exact same choice, frame it in the language of gains or the language of losses, and you still see the result. I mean, even just a semantic difference causes the change. So what this means security is hard to sell. Because security is always a small loss by my product versus a risk at a larger loss. What'll happen if you don't have the product? And you've probably experienced this when you went to your boss and said, hey, we need to buy this security thing because we are at the risk of this even bigger bad thing. And your boss looks at you and says, we didn't have that product last month and we didn't have the bad thing last month. Maybe we should take the chance. Right? Betting losses is how we work. Okay, so how does this affect incident response? I told you I'd get to this eventually. Right, so we all know that security is a combination of protection, detection, and response. Right, 3 steps. And we need response because protection isn't perfect. We need it more and more today, especially, right, because 1, we've lost control of our computing environment. There's a lot of protection we can't do. 2, attacks are becoming more sophisticated. We need more response. 3, we're increasingly pawns in other people's fights. And 4, we're living in a world where companies will naturally underinvest in protection and detection. Right, in the 1990s, I used to say security is a process, not a product. And by that, I meant something very strategic. What I meant is that you can't buy a bunch of stuff and be done. You have to continually evaluate your security and continually, reevaluate, repurpose your stance. Tactically, security becomes a product and a process. Right? Really, it's people, process, and technology. And that was something I used to say in the early 2000s. What's changing are the ratios. Right? The conventional wisdom in IT security is that people don't generally help. Right? That people are a liability, that people need to be removed from the system. I have a quote from usability guru Lori Faith Craner. She writes, whenever possible, secure system designers should find ways of keeping humans out of the loop. Great. Okay, keeping humans out of the loop. Right? And we all know this, right? People are a problem. People are our biggest security problem. And, we've been doing pretty well at this. Right? Entirely automated prevention systems, antivirus, patching. Right? Lots of automated and semi-automated detection systems. Right? We've been pulling people out of the loop left and right, and we're doing pretty well. The problem with response is that you cannot fully automate it. Right? You can't remove people from the loop. Sort of by definition, it's response. And if you think about it, as you move from protection, detection to response, the people to technology ratio goes up. Right? You need more people and less technology. And for a whole bunch of reasons. Right? All attacks are different, all networks are different, all security environments are different, and all organizations are different. Right? The regulatory environment the organization is in is different. The political and economic considerations of the organization are different. Right? And those differences are often more important than the technical considerations. This affects the economics of IT security. Right? The products and services for response are different. There are less network effects. There are much higher marginal costs. There are lower switching costs, and there's less of a lemons market. This will be interesting for us because it means that unlike a lot of our other areas in IT security, better products, better services, better companies will do better. There's less of a first mover advantage. There are far fewer natural monopolies. And again, this is a new thing for us in the industry. This is going to be a surprise. And I think it's a good thing. And I think it's something we're all going to benefit from. Right? So people, process, and technology. The key here is making it scale. So I'm at the follow-on sentence from Lori Craner. She wrote, however, there are some tasks for which feasible or cost-effective alternatives to humans are not available. She means we don't have robots yet. In these cases, system designers should engineer their systems to support the humans in the loop and maximize their chances for performing their security-critical functions successfully. So in places where you can't remove humans from the loop, you have to build technology to support humans in their critical tasks. Right? Think of any emergency response system. Think of police, think of fire, think of medical, think of military. Right? That's what technology does. Technology supports the humans who are critical in the response system. Right? In IT security, in response, we need technology that aids people and not the other way around. And the goal here is resilience. And very strongly, the goal here is to build resilient systems. I mean, we're not going to build impenetrable systems, and we shouldn't build fragile systems. And a lot of the response strategies echo resilience, right? Mitigation, survivability, recoverability, adaptability. Right? These are all ways to achieve resilience. And because response is real time, because response is the closest thing we have in IT to dogfighting, this is all about feedback loops. And there is a really nice piece of systems theory coming from the US Air Force that talks about this. Actually comes from dogfighting. And it's a notion of OODA loops. And OODA loops are starting to be talked about in IT. I think there's a danger we're going to overuse this concept, but I think it's extraordinarily valuable and something we need to think about. OODA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. And it is a cycle. And this was developed by a Air Force military strategist, John Boyd, and he developed it for thinking about dogfights. That a pilot in a dogfight is continuously going through this OODA loop in his mind. Observe, orient, decide, and act. Right? This is the process of collecting, evaluating, and then doing. And this type of process is widely applicable in any real-time adversarial situation. You'll see articles that talk about not only airplane dogfights, but strategic military planning, business competition, anything else. And it is, by definition, an iterative process. Right? That someone in this kind of situation is continually going through OODA loops in their head. And what Boyd observed is that speed is essential here. That if you can make your OODA loop faster than the adversaries, if you can get what the phrase he uses is inside the other person's OODA loop, then you have an enormous advantage. Right? You can respond effectively faster than he can react to your response. There's some good writing about applying this to cybersecurity. To incident response. There are papers. I recommend just Googling the term and wandering around a bit. What I think we need, the reason I like this framework is it gives us a way of discussing effective tools for incident response. So really what this talk is at this point is a plea for tools. That we need good IR tools to facilitate all of these steps. And we can break them down. So the first step is observe, right? Knowing what's happening on our networks in real time. So that's real-time threat detection from IDSs, that's log monitoring, log analysis tools, network and performance analysis tools, network management tools, physical security information, pretty much everything. I mean, be able to get all of that data in a place where it can be monitored in real time, right? Both before, during an attack. Orient, understanding what this information means in context. And context is critical in any response. So it's the context of the organization, what's happening in the company at the time, in the contents of the greater internet community. What kind of malware is out there? What kind of 0 days are we just seeing? What kind of geopolitical situation is going on? Right? Is there some new vulnerability that was just discovered or announced? Is the organization rolling out a new piece of software? Are they planning layoffs? Is there a merger? Has the organization seen attacks from this IP address before? Right? Has the network been opened up to a partner? I mean, everything again. So you're thinking of data feeds from the news, from intelligence feeds and the rest of the organization, just ways to put what's going on in context. And third is decide, which is figuring out what to do in the moment. This is actually hard. I mean, who has the power to make a decision? How do they make the decision? What sort of executive input is required? Is there marketing input? Is there PR input? Is there legal input? How do you justify the decision? Because after the fact, you mean hold off in front of some investigative body, right, either in your company or some lawsuit, to justify why you did what you did. Right? That's all part of the decision process. And then act, right? Being able to make changes quickly on the network. And again, here a lot of organizations fall down because the people in the IR team might not be authorized to make changes all the way over there. They might not have the right authorities. And we won't know what authorities they need until this all starts. Right? So requiring broad access, continual training. We need tools for all of these things. We need tools that are powerful, flexible, intuitive, right? Tools that aid people. And we need a lot of them. This isn't one thing. This is a whole ecosystem of incident response products and services that do this basket of things. Right? Incident response is getting more important. It's getting more important for a lot of reasons. Attacks are getting more sophisticated. The regulatory environment is getting more complicated. Litigations are getting much more common. Geopolitical factors are major. And again, organizations underspend on prevention. And the neat thing, and the reason I'm really optimistic about this in the next few years, is that IR software is not going to be like the rest of security software. That the requirements, all that stuff I just listed, none of them are those non-functional Y requirements. They are all stuff the products and services have to do. And this means the good stuff is going to beat out the mediocre stuff. And we as engineers need to start building the good stuff because it's important. Right? I've started doing this. I have a company, Co3 Systems, and I'm trying to build a management platform to coordinate incident response. I mean, that's just one piece of it. I think it's an important one and a cool one, but a lot of things have to feed into it. It has to feed into a lot of things. It all has to work together. Right? The goal here is to bring people, process, and technology together in a way that hasn't been done before. Right? In a way that is going to mirror less IT and more things like generic crisis management. Right? We have a lot to learn from other disciplines that have been doing this sort of thing for decades. And this is how we're going to defend against the threats. Right? This is what's going to work. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. Or not, but that seems odd. All right, so the way this works is one person has to raise their hand and then everyone else will. So someone has to sort of be the guinea pig. Yes?
Do you think with the new cybersecurity framework that NIST put out, that it will help companies start realizing they are underinvesting too much in the first two?
You know, I don't know. I mean, companies have been underinvesting for a long time, and there have been lots of frameworks. You know, I don't know how well NIST is going to make a change. I think fundamentally we will always underinvest. I mean, even if you think of politics, it is much more politically effective to respond to the attack than to invest before the attack. Where you get credit for doing something, it's focused, it's targeted, people are impressed, that we will underinvest always, and then after the fact try to fix things. I really think it's something very fundamental about us as people and what we're going to do. So I don't have a lot of hope that anything will change that to any real extent. I saw a hand behind you. If I can hear you, I will answer your question. So I don't think you can. I don't think you can automate instant response because it's too strategic. It's not like a patch that you just install the patch. It'll depend so much on human things. It depends so much on coordination. You can automate some of the getting the ins and the outs, right? Getting all the data you can automate, and when you figure out what to do, you can automate doing it. But you still need that step of analyzing it and figuring it out that requires a human brain. So pieces can be automated, and it makes sense to do it because the speed's of an essence here. But the actual process of IR will always require a human team. Now, companies might outsource that team. Right? There are lots of companies out there that will handle your IT infrastructure, including incident response. But they're going to have to coordinate with you because it's your business. So no, I don't think we can ever pull humans out of the loop here. I mean, when we invent AI, then maybe. But until then, no. Yes?
At what point will responsive measures become offensive and strike back? We stop carrying out collateral damage.
The question is about strike back. I'm really not in favor of strike back. I mean, vigilante justice tends not to work well in our society. That being said, I think we are going to see more of it because companies are getting fed up. But then you're going to have attackers mask their origins. I'll attack via his network and you strike back against him. That's great. So, we have a lot of trouble targeting attacks back. We can identify attacks sometimes, but it takes weeks and months. Right? That grows great reports from Mandiant take a while to generate. You're not going to figure out who attacked you in, 10 milliseconds, which is what you need for strike back. So, no, I do not think that's going to be the answer. And I think it's a dangerous trend. I'm really not in favor of it because it's too easy to get wrong and to go after innocents. Oh, there.
Do you think there will be a government requirement for incident response?
Question about government requirement for incident response. There's a lot of questions about government requirements for security in general. I think that is coming, especially in industries that matter. That just like there are government requirements for food safety, that we are going to see government requirements for data safety. It'll depend, U.S. versus Europe, on politics, but that sort of thing, minimal required security is something that's very common in other areas, and I think we'll get it in IT eventually. I'm not sure it's a good thing, mind you, but I do think it's coming. I think the era of government saying, let industry handle it, it'll all work out okay, is coming to an end. And that's just going to be more government involvement. At what level remains to be seen exactly. It was going to be government takeover of security. Is it going to be tax incentives? Is it going to be sort of like an FDA or an FTC, penalties and rules? I mean, it's going to depend on politics. But I do think more government involvement is coming. I saw a hand there next.
Have you seen effective patterns of cross-functional incident response teams? You mentioned spanning PR and maybe other groups.
I have seen, if you go to some of the incident response conferences, you hear about companies that are doing this very well. They tend to come from industries that have had incidents way before computers. So, oil and gas, or companies that have to deal with hurricanes. That incidents happen, and they're good at convening teams ad hoc and figuring out what to do and doing it. And the IT is just the tech add-on to a much broader type of system. So yes, there's a lot of places that we in IT can learn from who have been doing this since forever, just without the same level of tech. And again, I think that's a really good thing. We're going to see a lot of good cross-fertilization between.
Any examples or references?
I don't want to name company names, just because I don't know if I can and I forget, and if I get it wrong, people get mad at me. In the back.
Are cloud companies also doing security on the cheap, basically, or do they see security as a value add?
Questions about cloud companies and how they see security. It's sort of interesting to watch. The bigger cloud companies, their security model is trust us. And if you go to, you outsource your mail to Google, and you go to Google and say, we need to audit our mail system, they say no. And if you say, well, then we're not going to use you, they say, okay. Right? So their model is take it or leave it. And they're big enough they can do that. Some of the smaller companies do have some ability to audit. I think what's going to happen is some kind of waterfall audit model. The way this matures is that if you host your infrastructure, I'm making this up, on Rackspace will have an audit that you can get a copy of and staple in your audit. And then you hand that to the people who are outsourcing their stuff to you, and they staple it in their audit. And I think that's the way it'll go. It's going to still take a while to get there, but I see no other way to make this work. That there are going to be audit requirements, but no company is going to allow someone else to go in and audit their stuff. But they will give you the piece of paper saying, we've been audited and here are the results. So you can use that to satisfy your regulators. I think that's also, I think it's a long time coming, but that's going to be the way this has to end. I don't see any other way to make it work. There.
In the arena of incident response, how can the enterprise compete with a threat actor that has superior resources?
So the question is about in incident response, how could an enterprise compete with a threat actor that has superior resources? But they probably can't. The attacker's going to get in. The question is what happens afterward. And it's not always a matter of who has the more money wins. It has to do with risk aversion. It has to do with sort of the legal environment. Often, I can compete with a hacker that's better than me by calling the police. Right? That's a way I could temporarily get some more resources. So we have a lot of mechanisms in society for dealing with attackers that are more skilled, scarier, bigger, badder than us. We have just to make them apply here. But in general, I think an attacker that has more resources is going to get in. The question is now what? How do we kick them out? How do we regain security? How are we resilient against that? Right? That's the whole notion of response. We're responding because the attacker has broken into our network. We're not responding to a potential, we're responding to an actual. And there are a lot of things we can do. It's not a matter of saying, well, they're going to get in, so we're done. It's a matter of containing some of the damage. See a hand back there.
I'm curious what you actually mean by resilience in terms of getting out.
So by resilience, I mean several things. So how do we how do we mitigate the threat? Right, so how do we reduce the amount of damage the bad guy does when he's in? Survivability. How do we survive? Right? How do we make sure that we don't just fall over dead? How do we recover? How do we kick him out and regain security? This can be really difficult. Right? And how do we adapt? How do we continually improve ourselves to make our security better? So when I think of resilience, there's a whole kind of basket of, again, these different why requirements to make us secure even in the face of the bad guys are going to get in. And there are a lot of examples, right? As a species, we are resilient to disease. Right? Disease will kill some of us and won't kill all of us. And we have genetic diversity. That is the security mechanism by which we are resilient to disease. That's not actually a good strategy for IT. It's not going to be good to say, well, look, 10% of you will be caught by this virus, but the rest of us will survive. Right? That's kind of lousy. But, that is what species do. So I sort of think of a broad basket of ways that we can build security that can deal with the fact that there are threats that will penetrate our defenses. It's funny, this side is so silent. Oh, okay.
A couple of years ago, there were like 2 bounty programs. Now there's hundreds. Do you see that as part of this trend?
2 what kind of programs?
Bug bounty programs?
Bounty programs. You know, bug bounty programs I think are interesting and useful. I want them to help more. Unfortunately, both the military market and the black market pay more than the bug bounties.
But do they attract the same kind of people?
I think they attract different sorts of people. They certainly help. I mean, I like seeing it. It's companies taking this stuff seriously. But, you know, we're just seeing more and more cyber weapons arms manufacturers finding bugs and then not turning them in because they can make more money selling them to governments around the world. So, you know, I like the programs. I think they're good. I'm just not really holding out hope that they're going to make that much of a difference. It's frustrating. Yes?
When you talk about prospecting theory, how do we help change the mind?
Questions about prospect theory and how do we help change the minds of people. Now, this is hard, right? The way you overcome psychological biases in general is to know about them and compensate. Right? If you know that you are risk averse when it comes to gains and risk seeking when it comes to losses, you can notice the behavior in yourself and compensate for it. Just like there's a whole lot of psychological biases that casino floor is preying on, if you know them, you can walk by those tables, look at them and say, well, that's a tax on people who don't know math, right? And keep going. So, I mean, the way we overcome them is by knowing them. This is hard. You know, fear of terrorism. There's an enormous number of psychological biases that terrorists prey on, that we as a country have fallen completely for. You know, and you know, it's talking about them that gets us to think about them and hopefully get beyond them. It is possible. And it's not just IT, right? This is people trying to sell insurance. This is people trying to sell burglar alarms. You ask anyone who sells burglar alarms, and what he'll tell you is the only people who buy burglar alarms is after they've been robbed or after their neighbor's been robbed. Right? That's when they buy them. So that's the way it goes. I'm going to take one more question. And I will take it from person over there. You must be a louder person with the final question.
So you were talking about faster incident response, and you were talking about, you know, we don't have AI there yet, but there is a lot of work being done in anomaly detection and also, you know, behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But the big issue there is false positives, and especially when you get into large infrastructure that you're trying to respond to, and you can only do it with that intelligence collection. Where do you see that?
I mean, false positive Duke does kill a lot of these systems, but we're getting better at that. And that's detection, right? Detection still has a lot of room for good technology. The response is going to be what you do. And one of the important things in response, I probably should add that to my list of things I need, are ways to clear false positives quickly. So, I mean, I'll give you 2 examples. One is airport security. You walk through the metal detector, it goes off, and the screener can very quickly figure out what's going on. If it's a false positive, they will learn it quickly. On the other hand, when the NSA sends a tip to the FBI, they sent 10,000 over the 5 years after September 11th, it took hundreds of man-hours to clear every one of those false positives. They were much more expensive. So the trick really is a fast secondary test that lets you clear the false positives. That if you can do that, then you can deal with a much faster and noisier primary test. This is basically how we deal with medical tests. So that's the sort of thing we need. So thank you very, very much. I'll be here. I'm happy to talk, sign books. Come visit the Co3 booth. We're in the back right corner, and we're all wearing lime green shirts, except me, who refuses to. And we'll show you what we're doing. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the con. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you.